The Dallas Cowboys make a big splash in free agency, like for real. They actually made a big time signing. We'll break it down on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And Landon, on Friday afternoon, the Cowboys actually made a pretty big signing for them, bringing back Dante Fowler on a one-year, $6 million deal that can go up to $8 million based on incentives. We were hoping the Cowboys would address their edge rusher need, and they brought back Fowler.
Yeah, they did. You know, it feels like they brought him back, and it kind of is at least the cherry on top for the pass rush aspect of the defensive end position, right? Like you feel like now with Fowler, with obviously Micah, with Sam Williams, with Marshawn Nealon, you've got a quad group of a group of four that you feel like you can go to war with, right? You can go after and get after the quarterback. Obviously, adding in Osa, retaining him as your kind of Robin to Micah's Batman obviously helps as well. But now on top of that, you still have waves of defensive ends that can come in and rush the passer. I don't think that means that they are necessarily finished at the defensive end position.
No.
I think that they probably still could add another big body to play, in early downs if they wanted to improve that situation, or if they just, something fell to them in their lap in the draft. But I think that with the addition of Fowler, I feel like you've at least satisfied the need for pass rush talent on the outside for going into the 2025 season.
Feels like they have an actual real NFL defensive line now, right? Like they have their starters and they've got some good rotational players. If let's call Nealon the starter, because I've got a feeling they're going to want a bigger body on early downs.
Yeah.
And now you've got Sam Williams and you've got Dante Fowler as backups. You did bring in Solomon Thomas to help back up Osa Odighizuwa. You did sign Peyton Turner. You brought back Tyrus Wheat. Like you said, I think it still needs some more top-end talent, but you can absolutely win games with this pass rush unit. And to get Fowler back on a one-year, $6 million deal, I think is a pretty solid deal. We saw him have a bunch of sacks last year. Now, some of the advanced numbers were down a little bit, but I think that's partially because you're not playing opposite of Micah Parsons, right? Now back in Dallas, he's only ever going to see single blocks and lesser tackles. I would expect Fowler to be a productive edge rusher once again for Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been kind of the thing with him, right? Is that it's always felt like with Fowler, you've always needed a guy on the opposite side of him to kind of take away some of the attention, because where Fowler really truly feasts is on, one-on-one opportunities, isolated opportunities when all of the attention is on the other side of the offensive line. So yeah, I mean, kind of going into a situation in Washington where, I think Armstrong sort of took over that role a little bit as the season went on, but especially early on, it was Fowler who was getting kind of the lion's share of the attention there. Until Armstrong found his way, still managed 11 sacks and played, I think, over 600 snaps. I think I agree. With just less attention on him and just him playing, significantly less snaps than he had to play at Washington, where they just didn't have the depth that Dallas is going to have on the defensive end spot. I think it's going to give a chance for Fowler to kind of get back to the high efficiency that we saw him have when he was with the Cowboys 23 and 22.
And I've got to assume like the Cowboys are going to know how to use him. I don't think he's going to be your day one starter at edge. Maybe he is, but he's not going to play starter snaps. Where he's going to come on where he's going to be useful is, hey, it's 2nd and 10. It's 3rd and 8. Fowler's on the field. And maybe you find ways to get creative and have Sam Williams and Micah and Fowler on the field. But
yeah,
I don't think anybody is expecting this to be like, hey, this is your 800 snap starter opposite of Micah Parsons. It just gives you another quality depth player that they absolutely needed.
Yeah, and pass rush, right? Specifically,
Yeah.
obviously, he's a defensive pass rusher, so like you needed another kind of expert there to just give that pass rush some teeth. I think again, if you're adding Dante Fowler as the top of your pass rush, you're probably not thrilled about the whole situation. But if you're adding him as a complementary piece, a third threat to kind of complement Parsons and Odigizua, I think you like that. I think you like what he was able to do last year when he was kind of forced into the limelight, and now in a more reduced role as part of a rotation, you feel like he can get that efficiency back up and still be a real threat on the outside.
So overall, we're both very happy with this move. We were actually talking on the phone the other day, like, why hasn't Dante Fowler signed yet? Like, he's too good of a player to be on the market. But we're going to have a general conversation about the Cowboys' strategy and free agency later this week. But one of the things our mutual friend John Oney keeps bringing up is for a team that's talked about wanting to defend the run better, they really haven't signed anybody that's good at stopping the run. That's never been Dante Fowler's strategy or strength. It's never been Solomon Thomas's strength. Where are they going to find the run defenders to improve this unit?
I think it's a fair question to ask. But I also think that the answer is later. I mean, I think the thing is that the pass rush element is obviously the more valuable of the two kind of aspects of defense, right? Like you pay the pass rushers more than you pay the run stoppers. You pay the cover guys more than you pay the guys that are coming down to the box to also defend the run as well. And I think that what that means is that a lot of those guys that you may hire to kind of be run stopping specialists, they should still be available as we get closer and closer to the draft. And on the other side of the draft, I mean, think about when we signed, our run stuffing nose tackles and that sort of thing. Like that's all done on the other side of the draft. There's also plenty of opportunity, I think, to draft somebody who could come in and impact the game positively in the run game later in the draft. Because like I said, I think the passing aspect of it, the pass rush aspect of it is something that's more valuable. If you want to go in and get a big run stuffing defensive tackle who doesn't provide you anything as a pass rusher, those guys are going to be available later in the draft and then also on the other side of the draft. So I think there's still time. I think that's, why, I mean, not necessarily why they haven't signed anybody yet, but I think that's why there isn't necessarily urgency here because I think that you could still cobble together improvements in the run defense. I mean, the key is you got to do it still, but I think that there is still more time to get that done than there was trying to improve areas of your pass rush.
And I don't want to talk too much about the draft, but this is why I'm becoming more open to the idea of taking like Shamar Stewart in round one. He doesn't have the sack production, but he was a really good run defender at A&M. Fowler's on a 1-year deal. Sam Williams is on the last year of his deal. I think you could draft somebody like Stewart. He could come right in and help your run defense as a defensive end as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, I think they haven't done anything yet that has closed off any avenues of improvement at the defensive line. Yeah. So, if they, like you said, if Stewart falls to them and they like him, if they get to the second or third round and one of these bigger bodies guys like Kennard falls to them and they like him, I wouldn't at all be shocked to see them pull the trigger there and just add a different body type to the defensive line that maybe can do both, that can give you some early down run stoppage and then also be a developmental pass rusher.
So let's talk about the other signing the Cowboys made this weekend. We've been begging for them to sign a receiver in free agency, and they did. It's just not necessarily the name that we were hoping or expecting. Let's talk about Parris Campbell next. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, kids, wives, it's easy to lose track. But that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, your investments, and your spending in one place so you can stop managing your money and start building your wealth. When I started using Monarch Money, I realized how much money that I was wasting on either food or coffee runs that I didn't really need to make. But now I'm budgeting smarter and saving more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKDOWNNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNNFL for half off your first year. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is officially here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That is 200 extra bucks that you can use on everything from buzzer beaters, Cinderella stories, and to even who's cutting down the nets at the end of the tournament. I've got my eye on a couple underdogs now that the bracket came out. Filling it out this morning. We'll share it with you as we get a little bit closer to the tournament. But FanDuel makes it so easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games happening almost every single day, there's always something exciting to bet on. Plus, the FanDuel app is simple to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Later, the Cowboys have signed a receiver. It's Parris Campbell. Maybe not the receiver we were hoping for, but Parris Campbell, who has been, I think, on just about every team in the NFC East. What did you think of the signing?
I think, it's another kind of bottom of the roster placeholder signing for a team that needed some more speed at their wide receiver spot, right? You look at, obviously we've talked about the need to kind of add a secondary weapon in this passing attack. I think you look around at what's available in free agency, and there's just not necessarily a great fit, especially for the money. I mean, I think you can kind of point to Stephon Diggs if you want.
You didn't want Cooper Kupp at $15 million a year?
No, I did not want Cooper Kupp at 15
multiple years.
Million. Yeah, for multiple years. And again, like even Cooper Kupp, and I think we had talked about bringing him in, for certainly a cheaper deal and definitely not like maybe a multiple year deal. I think even that, it was about trying to maybe incrementally improve your roster, because I don't know that a Cooper Kupp signing or really any of these guys who kind of play the same position as CeeDee Lamb and kind of do that's what makes them sort of work properly in offenses, is their ability to be flexible. Adding another guy like that is helpful, but really what this team needs is more speed. And look, I don't, I'm not saying that Parris Campbell got added to be an integral part of this offense at all. I don't even know if he makes the team, but for the regular season. But I think what they've done is they've added a veteran receiver who has some speed. They've added some more speed to their wide receiver room, because again, I just don't think Turpin counts enough as a, down the field receiver just because he has speed. I think Campbell at least has some experience functioning in that role in some way, right? But again, I just think right now it's a placeholder to see what happens in the draft. He's kind of a fit in the sense that he kind of is in the same shape as the hole that the Cowboys have in their wide receiver room. But I don't think that the Cowboys or anybody should be fooled into thinking that this is something that's going to move the needle in the pursuit of finding a secondary passing weapon for the Cowboys.
I was listening to Bill Polian talk about Parris Campbell. This is probably a year ago on Sirius XM. I think it was Polian that drafted Campbell, or he was either there that last year. And he said one of the best practice players you'll ever see. When he's healthy, he is so explosive. And if you remember coming out of Ohio State, he was 6 foot 210 and ran in the low 4.3s, but he's had some injuries, a couple nagging injuries, and I think it's just zapped some of his explosiveness. But you're talking about a vet minimum receiver that you're just bringing in to see. Maybe it clicks in his offense. 99% chance that it won't, right? So he's not going to impact your wide receiver room at all. If you were going to draft a guy at 12, before the Parris Campbell signing, you're certainly not taking that guy off your board, right? So it doesn't have any impact. But what I think is more interesting is you're seeing with some of the wide receiver deals across the league, Landon, whether it's like the T. Higgins deal getting 28 million, DK Metcalf getting 30 million, or even go down a little bit to like Cooper Kupp, who's pretty washed up at this point, getting 15 million, or guys that are like number 4 receivers, like Tutu Atwell, getting 11 million, Hollywood Brown getting 10 million. Like,
yeah,
I don't think you want to pay these guys in free agency. I think you want to start drafting them early, and just that's the way to find your wide receiver 2, your wide receiver 3. I was trying to think, who's the best free agent wide receiver acquisition over the last decade and a half? Is it like Emmanuel Sanders back in 2014? Because the list is very, very bad.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I mean, look, they made their own bed, but that's kind of the issue that the Joneses have found themselves in, right? Is that even if they wanted to kind of come out here and prove the fan base wrong and spend a bunch of money on trying to improve this roster, like there just isn't a ton of opportunity, right? And
not at receiver. There are at other
spots.
Oh
yeah, that's what I mean specifically at receiver, right? Because to me, receiver seems like it's almost kind of the area where it seems like the Cowboys fans have focused the most, because they know the names that are involved. Never mind that, Davante Adams is, even though that Davante Adams is one guy that I probably would have done.
That's the best one on the market, but I don't think Dallas wanted to pay $23 million a year.
Yeah, but even then it was, like I said, $23 million a year. He still is not quite the same player, but that's the one deal that I think I would have been interested in if it had been a little bit more reasonable. I think the rest of these guys, it's like you can spend the money and it may improve your roster, but it certainly isn't moving the needle to the tune of what you're paying them for, right? And so I don't blame the Cowboys for not being overly aggressive in this market. Like people, I mean, people keep throwing out the name Amari Cooper, and that's the problem, guys. Like, I mean, Amari Cooper is not like, you're remembering Amari Cooper 4 years ago, not like the guy that couldn't get into the offense in Buffalo, right? Like, so I think that wide receiver is specifically one of those positions that, now that you're seeing the salary cap explode the way it is year in and year out, teams are doing even more than they were before to try to retain their good players, which means that good players aren't really making it out into the market. And
25 positions, especially at those spots.
Yeah, I was just gonna say at the money 5 positions, especially, but even more especially, it feels like at wide receiver, right? Like if you're even halfway decent team, I mean, look, we just saw today Cincinnati has 2 superstar wide receivers, a 1 and a 1A, a 1 and a 1B, right? And they paid both of them, right? Like they just gave them as they should. So the point being is that the guys that are making it to market, they're bound to be overpaid because of the scarcity, because there's just not a lot of these top end wide receivers. There's a reason that they didn't get re-signed, and frankly, those reasons are even stronger than they were 4 or 5 years ago, because if you have even just a little bit of an excuse to re-sign a wide receiver with all this cap space, you should be. So if you make it to the market, there really is legitimately pox. There's problems with your game. So
they need their version of Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, but you get those guys in the draft, not in free agency. Now, what I think you can do is fill out like your defensive roster with guys like Dante Fowler. Like, I think if you need a third edge rusher that can come in and give you decent production, you can find that. You're not finding quality number 2 receivers in free agency because they just don't hit the market ever.
Yeah, and just to kind of even further squash this a little bit, like even if you went and paid, I mean, again, I'll say Amari Cooper's name because he's available and everyone keeps talking about him. Like it didn't solve your problem. Like he's not enough to actually move the needle the way you need it to. So
not at this stage of his career.
Yeah, that's my issue right now, is that if these folks that are saying like sign this guy, sign Diggs, like you could do that, but to me, you probably still need to go back into the draft and draft a guy. So why am I paying $17 to $20 million for a guy that is, not as good as his name recognition? and it's still going to make me go double dip into the draft to go get a guy to be his replacement in a few years.
The other thing that I want the Cowboys to do is get a long-term solution at wide receiver too. So it's not this constant turnover of CD and Dak having to learn a new teammate. Get somebody that is going to be there on a cheap rookie contract for the next 4 years. So when maybe CD Lamb's contract expires at the end of, what would it be, year 10 for him, you have a guy in place ready to take over for him. So go to the draft to get your number 2 receiver. Don't do it in free agency. Parris Campbell has no impact on what the Cowboys are doing there. Let's talk about a free agent loss that the Cowboys had on Sunday. That's Cooper Rush. We'll talk about that one next.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Draft Show with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez. Now that the season is over, get the latest draft rankings, rumors, and news every day, and find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Landon, the Cowboys actually lost a key free agent on Sunday. Cooper Rush signed a 2-year, $8 million deal with the Baltimore Ravens. Curious fit. Anyways, the Cowboys need a backup quarterback. They have Dak Prescott under contract coming back from a major hamstring injury. They have Will Grier under contract, and that's it.
You know, I actually think that the Cooper Rush thing is an interesting fit. You mentioned it, right? But I think it is interesting in the sense that I like the idea of being able to bring in a quarterback who maybe changes up the style of the offense when he comes in, right? Like, obviously you can't do that too much, like, because it would be very prohibitive, especially with a backup quarterback, to have an offense that's so different that you aren't able to practice all the time, right? Like, so I think that would make it a little bit more difficult. But I've always liked the idea of, you know, having a mobile quarterback that, like, if you just had a couple of zone read plays that are easy to install, it adds an element to the offense while you're missing the kind of elite element of having a starting quarterback, right? This is all an interesting way to say, I kind of think that the Cowboys should consider the inverse of this, right? I'm keeping in mind that Cooper Rush is probably closer to Dak Prescott than Dak Prescott is to Lamar Jackson at this point in his career.
Definitely.
So I'm thinking that, you know, the Cowboys, you know, should consider replacing Cooper Rush with maybe something a little bit different than what I think that's kind of what they were trying to trend towards a little bit with Trey Lance. But you know, just to kind of open this conversation with how the Cowboys are going to replace this key piece, I think that the Cooper Rush situation does provide kind of almost an inverse blueprint for how I think the Cowboys should handle this, and that's, you know, potentially developing a guy that has some more tools that can to do some things with his legs a little bit while he's learning to kind of be a more designed pocket passer. Obviously, there's only a couple of those guys that kind of fit that mold in this class, but I do think it's something that should be considered, especially when you've got someone like Clayton Adams as your offensive coordinator who has a history of being able to take advantage of these types of quarterbacks. It's something to consider.
100% agree. Like, I think that the backup here, or whether you want to call him a backup, developmental quarterback, needs to be somebody that has some athleticism to maybe open up the run game. However, where do you find that guy? Because I don't think it's in free agency right now, unless you want to bring back Trey Lance. And it sure doesn't seem like they want to bring back Trey Lance, right?
No.
There's only a couple of those guys in this year's draft, and probably the most notable is like Jalen Milroe.
Yeah.
He's likely to be a day 2 pick. And if it's not Jalen Milroe, what do you do? Because it seems like, to me, we got a report from David Moore at the Dallas Morning News that the Cowboys are going to draft a quarterback this year, and it's going to be in day 3. Do you think there's any chance they do it on day 2?
I guess this is my pitch to say, if they are going to do it on day 2, then get somebody like Milroe, right? Like get somebody that adds an angle to your offense that is something a little bit different while he's learning to play quarterback in, the more traditional manner, because that's where the offenses are trending anyways in the NFL. Like I said, it adds another element that the defense suddenly has to, be prepared for if he has to come into the middle of the game. It gives you that much more opportunity to create explosive plays, right? In a manner that may be confusing for the defense. And if you're going to draft a day 3 guy, then I'm okay with, here's the thing about drafting a day 3 guy, especially these few years, right? Because of the COVID stuff, right? We're kind of at the end of the COVID affected careers in college football. Some of these guys are coming out 25. I think there was even a 26-year-old, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Tyler Shuck. He's going to be
Tyler
26.
Shuck. Yeah, he'll be 26.
Herbert's backup at Oregon.
Yeah, which is crazy. I think it's those guys have a touch more value to me, right? They have a ton of experience. They maybe they don't have upside, right? Maybe you're not developing them into the next starting quarterback. But if I could draft another Cooper Rush in the 6th or 5th round, I've got 3 of those picks. Maybe 2.
I've got like 75 picks from rounds 5 on. That's whatever.
Throwing one at a backup quarterback who could come in and potentially beat out a Will Grier and be very cheap and as a guy that you can kind of hold on to for a few years, I think that's something worth exploring for sure.
We're gonna have a conversation about Shedeur Sanders later this week. I don't want to do it today, but we'll do it later. But I actually don't think this is a terrible class to take a day 3 quarterback on, because there are some options, whether you want like a Will Howard or Quinn Ewers. I don't think Quinn Ewers goes inside the top 100, but I know there's other people out there that disagree with me. Yeah. Maybe you go with, a Kyle McCord from Syracuse, who I know people like a lot. There are options in this class, especially if you only need a backup. You're not drafting a guy to be like hopefully to be a starter down the road. I know we talked about Dylan Gabriel before, maybe in that 5th, 6th round.
Yeah,
I think they're going to be okay, but I do have to say I am a little nervous about Dak missing so much time over the last couple of years and not having a more established backup behind him.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the reason that we're having this conversation, the reason that it's more, the kind of, what is it, the elephant in the room in this whole conversation is that Dak has had problems finishing seasons, and has finished a couple of the last few seasons on the injured reserve list, and at the very least has missed a couple of games, right?
Well, let's go through the injuries. 2020, he had the foot injury that cost him the season. 2021, he had the calf Achilles injury where he just was never the same in the second half of the year. 2022, he had the broken thumb. And then 2023, I think he played all 17 games, healthy that season. 2024, he had the foot injury kind of going into the year. Remember, on July 4th, he had the boot on. And then he obviously had the hamstring injury that caused him to miss most of the season. I mean, we're talking about somebody that's missed a lot of time over the last 5 years, and he's not getting any younger.
Yeah, and some of it's fluky. Some of it seems like it was kind of cascading a little bit earlier. Either way, it doesn't really matter at this point. Like you just kind of you need. It's clear that you need to have a plan in place in case he misses time. It's certainly not enough that you're like, oh, it's time to move on from Dak Prescott.
No.
It's more of a, hey, this is something that as he gets older, we need to have a plan in place because there's an opportunity that, even if he doesn't miss a game, if he misses 2 quarters in a key game, like that's enough that you need to have a solid backup plan, somebody who can help win you games.
It feels like they need to have their version of Kyle Orton, who was the backup for Tony Romo. Like, was it 2013, 2014? Like somebody that's been a starter in the NFL that can come in and get through a couple of games. Who is that quarterback? I don't know. I don't know if it's Carson Wentz, Jameis Winston, Russell Wilson. I've got no idea, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys are interested in one of those type of quarterbacks here over the next couple of weeks. All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Follow Landon on X at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.